Hey guys, I'm Brian O'Day, the Executive Director of the Praetorian Project. The Praetorian Project is a family of multiplying churches and military communities worldwide. And in this video, I'm joined with Pastor Clint Clifton, who is the founding pastor of Pillar Church at Dumfries. And we are hanging out here actually in Stafford, Virginia today.
Yep.
And we're going to talk about a very simple, but it has been profound to me concept. You shared it with me when I was preparing to be sent out to plant Pillar Church of Jacksonville. And it's this idea of Uni-Flock. All right.
Which is a word I made up.
Which is a word you made up, which the best words are words you make up or redefine. So Uni-Flock. Before we get to what Uni-Flock is, what problem did you see as you looked at pastors, church planters, trying to navigate things? What problem did you see?
Well, growing up, I knew some pastor kids, and one of the common themes I heard from pastors' kids, notoriously pastor kids are rebellious and, kind of all over the place, and have a wandering period. And notoriously what you would hear from them is my dad was a different person at home than he was at church. And so there seemed to be like a necessary divide or distinction between when my dad's at this place, he has to be the spiritual person. He can't have sins. He can't struggle. He's got to have all the answers. And then at home, I see his struggles. I see his sins. I see that he doesn't have all the answers. And the gap isn't good for a kid to observe about their dad or mom.
Yeah. Okay. So you saw that pastors in your experience saw that they had two very distinct flocks. The flock of the church, where they're on all the time, their pastor, they can't fail. And then the flock of the family. And you saw it impact the kids, but probably also the wives. But as a kid growing up, you probably didn't see that quite as much.
Yeah, not at all. And mainly it was a few friendships with pastors' kids or ministry kids, that really caused me to think about that. As a person who was feeling drawn to pastoral work, I was, even as a teenager, thinking, man, I don't know if I want my kids to grow up like this, but I aspire to the work. So.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. So this idea of Uni-Flock, I am curious, how did you come up with this idea, and then what is it?
Well, there's that qualification in 1 Timothy chapter 3, and I think it's in Titus also, but that we be a good manager of our household. And it's even a common idea that pastors are to be shepherds in their households, and everybody accepts that, believes that, that's true. And so I just remember thinking, like, do these flocks have to graze so far from each other? Is there a way in which my family can see themselves as part of the congregation, and where my congregation can see my family as part of the congregation? So yeah, and see those things just unified more. The imagery that I've used when I've written about this is the further away two flocks graze from one another, the harder it is for one shepherd to manage them. And so we want those if I were an actual shepherd, I'd want to blend those flocks, or at least have them right next to each other,
right,
so that I would never have to leave one vulnerable by going to the other.
Yeah, that's a great point. The further they are away, the harder it is for one shepherd to tend both of them. Okay, so this idea, bring them close together, try to have them overlap as much as possible. So practically speaking, for a pastor in a church, what are some practical ways that you've done that, and or you've seen other people do that?
Okay, first of all, there's two prerequisites to doing this that are necessary. One is your wife has to want this. So your wife has to see value in this. If you're a pastor, she has to care that you want those two things to be blended and see the necessity of it. If she doesn't, she'll never understand why you're always pushing them to be involved in ministry activities, and she'll never understand why you want to drag your kids with you to everything you do. So that's one of them.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I think would be incredibly difficult to do if you had started off on the wrong foot, so to speak. If you'd started off grazing far apart and then you tried to put the two closer together, I think you have a much more challenging, step ahead of you. The thing that it was true for me was I became convinced of this idea as a young man before I had kids. And then my wife and I got on the same page about it. And then when we started having children, we consciously integrated them into the life of the ministry.
Okay, that's really good. The prerequisites, and if you've started, like if you're a pastor or a church planter and you've started with your flocks very far apart, there needs to be some real intentional discussions with your wife first and foremost, kids that might be old enough to notice this change, and probably church leaders as well, other church leaders.
In fact, if I found myself in the shoes of that pastor today, I think that what I would do is I would call a family meeting. And I would say, guys, I think I've made a mistake as your dad and pastor of this church. I think I've separated our home life and our church life a bit too much, and I want to work to integrate it. That's going to mean that I'm going to do far fewer ministry activities without you. Right. And it's also going to mean that we're going to find ways for you to have meaningful involvement in the pastoral work I do.
Yeah, that's great. So what are some practical things you've been able to involve your family in the ministry? You planted a church. You've been pastoring a church for a long time. You've done some other roles in life. What are some things you've been able to?
Well, when your kids are small, and especially if you're in church planting, I think ministry altogether, but especially church planting, you have your kids and your wife are actually a huge advantage to your work. There's no way in which they hinder your work except it's annoying to have to, integrate them into everything where you feel like you should be professional. It doesn't feel professional.
Yeah.
So I would say, let me just give you some specific examples from my family that have been memories that we look back on and I think have. I'll say two right now. My oldest son just graduated from high school. I have all the way down to a 10-year-old. So we're still in the midst of this. Yeah. I have 5 children. It's very possible that, something goes off the rails down the line. But right now, my kids love the church. They love the ministry. They love that I'm a pastor. Right now, everything looks good.
Yeah.
But I'll say, when we were planting a church, there's a ton of outreach. We're out in the community all the time. We're knocking on doors. And I found, I'm going to go out 3 evenings a week and meet people in the community. And I'm either going to do that by myself or I'm going to do that with my kids. Now, of course, my family's sometimes they're like, it's hot. I don't want to go. No, This is our family has a motto. What we do together. That's the family motto.
That's a good motto.
And so if we're going to do something, we're all going to do it. If we can't all do it, then we're going to decide not to do it. Very rare occasion do we say, okay, we'll sort of separate and not do this. So that has worked out really good. When I found that I'll tell you this, if you do outreach and you take your kids with you over and over again, they will become part of the outreach. I remember this one instance where we were literally knocking on doors, which that might not be your style, but we were knocking on doors, and I had my son with me, and he was probably 4 or 5 at the time. And as soon as the person opened the door that we knocked on, he fell off their porch into their bushes about 4 feet and started screaming, crying. And the person, opened the door, didn't know who I was or why I was there, opens the door, sees this kid fall off into the bushes, start screaming. I'm like, oh no. And I run down and grab him. And he's bleeding, and there's all these, and the person's like, come on in, and starts cleaning him up and all this stuff. Yeah. And we got through the whole fiasco, and I said, yeah, I'm from Pillar, and we're here to invite you to church. And,
wow.
And it ended up being a good relationship. But it was that situation was just, it's messy. To do this, it's messy.
Right.
But it's so good. My kids remember doing that stuff, and they see it as, it's funny when we say, when we talk about our church now, our kids, when they describe it, they say our family planted Pillar Church.
Right.
They don't say my dad planted Pillar Church, because they very much were part of every step of the process.
That is a couple things you said there. One, the who I don't know if you know it.
Yeah.
So Noah falling off the porch is the reason people have in their minds of not to do this.
Right.
But you said, no, that actually built into the fabric of the church and into the fabric of my family, that we're in this together and life's a little messy and having kids around is inconvenient at times, but this is what we're supposed to do.
And it
as a
made it
church.
okay for the other families in our church to bring their kids.
Absolutely.
Because I was bringing my kids.
Right.
It's like everything we did, the expectation was you just bring your family along. So nobody ever had to choose, I'm going to be at work all day. Am I going to go home and spend time with my family, or am I going to go serve the Lord and go to the church and plant the church in the community? I think, too, here's the thing that I just think is so critical. I hear church planters and people that are involved in church ministry with this idea all the time. You know, they're concerned that by going and planting a church, I'm going to deprive my kids from some ministry activity, some youth group, some bells and whistles of being a part of an established church. And I just want to ask you a simple question. I mean, think about what do you believe will make more of an impact on your children over the 18 years that you have them? Is that to be at a church that has a full-time paid youth pastor and a slide for the kids to go down in the kids ministry area? Or do you think watching their mom and dad struggle to plant a church in a community that doesn't have one, bring the gospel to people that don't have it, will make more of an impact? Which thing do you think will do it? And I'll tell you all day long, 100%, watching mom and dad, partnering with mom and dad to bring the gospel to a community, making them part of the mission will do it.
Yeah. Not even just watching mom and dad struggle through that process, but even as a family struggling through that process. Because, like you said, a lot of times when it's like, hey, kids, we're going to do this thing. I don't want to do that thing. I want to sit at home and do nothing. Okay, well, so it's struggling together to do that. And we're getting a little into like philosophical for the church, but one pastor said, we don't want a church where when people show up to church, everybody goes to their room and everybody segregates. We actually want to bring people together. And the pastor and church planter specifically creates the context and the culture of, yes, this is a place for families. This is a place for families to be involved and to be involved together.
The thing that makes dad being a pastor so complicated for kids, and I'd commend Barnabas Piper's book, The Pastor's Kid, to you. He discusses this in detail. But one of the things that makes it so difficult is expectation management. A child of a pastor, especially like a senior pastor, if you have that kind of leadership model where there's the one person that everybody knows and listens to as the expert, if you're in a situation like that, the child of the pastor is known by everyone, but not really known by anyone. He's kind of a local celebrity, so to speak. And everybody's looking at him to see if that pastor's teaching lines up with his family. And so there's this incredible pressure on a child. So what you can do as a pastor, and what I sought to do, is to remove that pressure by telling my congregation, stay away from my kids in regard to that. Like, don't put those expectations on my kid. And if you just highlight the situation to them, sometimes they realize, oh, I wouldn't want my kids living under that kind of pressure, that kind of scrutiny. That's not fair to do to my pastor either. And they're incredibly kind and cooperative when you just bring it up. But if you don't bring it up, they don't think about it, and they just innately put that pressure on them. I had this one situation that really stuck in my mind, and I always think of it. My same son, Noah, he was, I don't know, he's like 5, 6 years old, and we're in a church building one day, and he's running laps, around the building, just like an Indian. I mean, going crazy, running laps around the building. And this one lady from the church grabs him by the arm when he runs by and gets down on his level. And I'm within earshot, and I'm like, takes a village. It's good.
Yeah.
Like somebody can discipline my kids, no problem.
Yeah.
But she gets down on his level, and I heard the phrase, and you're the pastor's son. And my blood started to boil, like, oh, that's the thing. That's it right there. Right. That's the thing that makes my kid think he's different. But I just think it's your job to protect your wife and your kids from those sorts of expectations. If your wife is feeling the pressure of those expectations, you can relieve her of those by saying, babe, don't worry about that. Don't worry about what so-and-so thinks about you, and be willing to defend that. Don't placate to the expectations of people in your congregation.
Yeah, I think there's a good word for church members as well, to not put that burden on pastors' kids. You may hear a story, you may learn of some information in an unnatural way, which Barnabas Piper talks about this in his book as well. People would learn information about me in a very unnatural way.
Right.
And so to not use that, like try to get to know kids. You should get to know kids in the church anyway, but don't elevate pastors' kids in a different way than you would any other kid of any other member in the church.
Yeah. For example, if you give a sermon illustration about your son's baseball team, and everybody in the church is going to ask him about the baseball team, and so he's like, I don't even know this person's name or who they are, and they know about my baseball team. You know, it's just it makes things weird. I'm not saying never give an illustration about your kids, but if you do that, do it with their permission. Do it in a way that kind of instructs the congregation about how to treat that info.
And understand the kids. One of my kids loves being used in illustrations and wants to talk to everybody about what he's doing, and other kids don't. And so understanding the kids as well. So to tie a bow on this, I think it would be easy, to listen to part of this video, watch part of this video, be like, I don't got it. I'm too far gone. My flocks are too far apart. This balancing act, I've been keeping it up for long enough, so I don't really need to do that. I just want to close our time, and any thoughts you have in response to these passages I think would be helpful. But 1 Timothy 3:5, which you alluded to in your coming up with this idea of Uni-Flock, actually 1 Timothy 3:4, this is talking about the qualification for a pastor elder. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? And the insinuation is he can't.
Yeah, so it's your family, unlike almost any job that you could even think of, your family and the management of your family and the pastoral work you do in your family is what qualifies you. So Matthew Henry, the commentator, he says the home is like a pastoral petri dish. I love that. He said it's like a little place where an experiment of pastoral fitness takes place. Yeah. And that's so good because you're never going to be a better pastor than you are in your household. It's not, you can't be a good pastor at your church and bad pastor at home, because you're a bad pastor at your church if you're a bad pastor at home. Right. And I think when you're choosing elders and leaders too, that's a great measuring rod to say, is this person shepherding his wife and children? If so, then maybe he could shepherd more people than just them, not just this guy's a good guy or has good leadership abilities, but looking at the home. That's
really good. And then he goes on, Paul writing to Timothy, again, he's talking about how to establish a church and how to organize a church and those types of things. And he says in 1 Timothy 5:8, but if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever.
So provide for your family first, from a shepherding standpoint, and sometimes it feels like we can't do that, or our job's on the line, or people will have an expectation of us. You manage those expectations. Don't let people manage them for you. Yeah,
that's great. I think it's, lots of really good points, a couple really practical, a couple moments you just alluded to in several points. It's in these little moments, these little decisions, that decision of that guy to do that, your decision to, hey, I know my kids don't want to do this right now, but we're going to go do this outreach event. So all those little moments, and I would just encourage, especially pastors, church planters, pay attention to those little moments, and then also just look at your calendar for this week. Is there what one or two things can you involve your family in? And it's been a blessing to be a part of that for the past couple of years hanging out with you. It's influenced me a lot, so much so that I'm here on a work trip, and my family is with me. Yeah. And you are hosting us in your home, and our wives are deepening their relationship, and our kids are deepening their relationship with one another, and that just really helps for the long haul of ministry.
You and I know we could say this, and the other pastors are part of our work. My kids' fondest memories and best friends are other ministry kids. And we were just talking sort of jokingly the other day. What do we think the first marriage that's going to come out of this is going to be? Because there's so many kids now, and the odds are that some of them are going to marry each other.
And that leads us to a whole nother video that we're not going to do. But hopefully this one has been helpful for you to think about this important topic. And if you have any more questions about the Praetorian Project, learn more at the praetorianproject.org, not the praetorianproject.org. If you need help spelling Praetorian, email Colby at pillarchurchsbc.com.